that Bayom Hazeh could have said Bayom Hu on that day, what it means on this day, to tell us that when you encounter Torah, it should be the equivalent of a new experience. We discussed yesterday, even though this was not the moment they were receiving the Torah was going to be received 6 days later. But nevertheless, since the objective of arriving here is ultimately to receive the Torah in this location, if the Torah wouldn't be considered something, the equivalent of something unique and special, the excitement would not precede that moment. So even when you're going to study Torah, you have to already have that degree of anticipation of something special is going to happen, which gives an indication to what degree you esteem and revere the Torah itself. And that's a prerequisite to merit the siyata d'shmai, the divine assistance to be able to process and retain the Torah itself. The Rav Kalatsky over here cites a Medrash. I mean, it's really explicit in the Medrash, but he explains it within the Pasuk. I mean, if the objective of leaving Mitzrayim was to receive the Torah at Sinai, why did Hashem give it to us the moment we left Egypt? Should we give him the Torah? Why did Hashem wait 3 months or 50 days before he gave us the Torah? So the Medrash tells us, just as a woman who menstruates, she has to wait 7 days before she's able to enter into a state of purity with the mikvah. Here, the level of impurity was so overwhelming, intense, you needed 7 periods of 7 days to be able to be expunged of the impurity of the impact of the Egyptian experience. Therefore, they had to wait 3 months. Until then, if they would have received it sooner, there would have been so many levels of obstacles within their spirituality, they couldn't have absorbed it and internalized it as they should, because of the impurity of Egypt, which still, they were carrying all that impurity. And this we mentioned yesterday, the whole counting of Sefira, that every day we went up another level of another Shar Taira. We reached the Memte Shari Tuma, the 49th level of impurity. Every day we're out of Egypt, we advanced one level and we were gradually relieving ourselves of that impurity until finally the 50th is the pinnacle, and that's when we were qualified to receive the Torah. That's the idea. Therefore, it's B'Chodesh HaShlishi. But he reads it into the Pasuk, the Rav Kalatsky. It says, B'Chodesh HaShlishi, L'tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim. It could have said, on the 3rd month, we arrived at Midbar Sinai. We understand we left Egypt. What does the Torah have to say on the 3rd month after the Jews had left Egypt? So he says, that's the Pasuk saying, because we had left Egypt, it took 3 months to be able to relieve ourselves of that level of impurity. That's why it mentions over here, from the time the Jews had left Egypt. Although we knew that, but in the 3rd month, it wouldn't be enough. But it's explaining over here to emphasize this point. It was up to Hashem, we would have given to us sooner. But because in terms of ourselves, we didn't have yet the capacity to absorb it and to process it as we should have, therefore, he waited 3 months after we left Egypt. Okay? I'd want to ask the question, on the 2nd day of Pesach, we bring the Omer offering. And that's when we start counting Sefira. The 49 days until the giving of Torah at Sinai. The Torah tells us that on the 2nd day, on the 1st day of the Omer, the reason why it's called Sefiras HaOmer, they bring the Omer offering. The Omer offering was a meal offering that was brought from barley flour. It was not brought from wheat flour. All menochos, all meal offerings in the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan were from flour, were not from barley. There are only 2 meal offerings that are from flour, from barley. The Minchas Omer, the Omer offering, and if a woman is a suspected adulteress, She was forewarned by the husband. She should not sequester herself with another man, and she defies him, and she does. And it's questionable whether she committed adultery, and she claims her innocence. So part of the ritual to determine whether she's innocent or guilty, she has to bring a mitcha sota, a meal offering with sota. The mitcha sota, that meal offering, is made of barley, not wheat flour. And the Mishnah tells us in sota, why is it barley and not wheat? Because what is the fodder that you feed animals? You feed animals barley. He also masa behema, even if she didn't commit adultery, to go and sequester herself with a man who your husband forewarned you because he suspects there's something going on, and you defy his warning and put yourself in that position, which is totally unacceptable, even if she didn't commit adultery. He also masa behema. This is the words of the Mishnah. She behaved like an animal. Therefore, the ingredients for a mincha is machal behema, is animal fodder. That's the reason why it's different than any other meal offering, which is wheat. Because the Gemara tells us in Urias that the main consumption of wheat is for the human being. We know that grains, wheat is a staple of life. Wheat, so that's for the human being. Barley is the animal. So for the Omer offering is barley. Why is it barley? So Maral of Prague explains that in terms of who we should have been, who we were not. When we left Egypt, we barely had a trace of spirituality within ourselves. We were at the Memte Shari Tuma, the lowest level. So in terms of what we should have been, which we were not, we're purely on an animal level. To indicate that and to emphasize that point, the Omer offering that we bring is barley. Again, because that's animal fodder. Shavuos, which we reach the pinnacle of our spirituality, that we're worthy to receive the Torah. So then we reach the level of Odom. That's from Atam Kurim Odom. We assume the classification of Odom, the human being, the fully functioning person who has control over his behavior. It's not instinctive that the animal drives the person, but the human being has the ability to control himself. Therefore, the carbon shtei alechem, the carbon omer, the carbon that's brought on Shavuos, is what that's made of wheat rather than barley. That's the Maral of Prague. We started off at the lowest level, which indicates we were level of animals, since barley, Shavuos, we reached the pinnacle, that's Odom, therefore it's wheat. That's the Maral of Prague. It's interesting. The law is that Omer is Matir Chodosh. The Omer offering, any grain that took root after the Shtei Alechem were brought, after the Omer was brought, you're not permitted to eat that grain until the next year when you bring the Omer. The Omer permits you to eat the Chodosh. The new wheat that took root after the previous year, you're not permitted to eat that crop until you bring the Omer offering. The Omer is Matir Chodosh. It permits you the new grain. What about to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash? Although that grain is permitted for human consumption, for the Jews' consumption, but if you bring a meal offering in the Beis HaMikdash, you're still not permitted to bring it from the new grain. It has to be brought from the old grain. What permits Chodosh in the Mikdash to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash as a meal offering? That's the Shtei Alechem. The Shtei Alechem that brought on Shavuos is Matir Chodosh b'Mikdash. That permits the Chodosh, the new grain, to be brought in the Mikdash. So the meal offerings from the Shtei Alechem, Shavuos onward, the grain that you were not permitted to use for the meal offering, from now you could use it for the meal offering. It's Matir in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, it's interesting. What is the Omer offering that's brought on the second day of Shavuos, which is barley? That permits Chodosh for the people, for human consumption. The Beis HaMikdash, which is the ultimate level of spirituality, that you cannot bring the grain. That you have to wait for the shtei alechem. Just conceptually speaking, based on what we're saying. What is physical consumption? Human consumption. That's the animal. You have to feed the human being. When we say ein kemech ein Torah. If you don't have food, you're a human being, you have to maintain your existence. You have to be nourished, you have to be sustained. So the grain is the staple of life. So what are you sustaining? That's the physicality. So since the barley itself signifies what we were then, we're only the animal, so it permits the grain for human consumption. The Beis HaMikdash, which represents the spirituality, our relationship with Hashem. When we became Adam, when you have relevance to Hashem, it has to be what permitted you for your consumption. That's as a human being. That's your physicality. When you bring the Omer offering to Beis HaMikdash, what is the essence of the korban? It's the komets. When you take the palmful of the mincha, you sacrifice it on the mizbeach. What goes on the mizbeach, that has to do with spirituality. As a result of that, until we became Adam, until we achieved that level of spirituality, that we reached the pinnacle of our spirituality, only that korban, which represents that permits the grain to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash. Because that's when we rose and we were reclassified. Until that, we were not yet Adam, for that reason. Okay? So we once asked the question, the halacha is, the Arizal, many people explain this, that during Pesach, chametz is not permitted. Because what does chametz represent? Chametz represents the sitra achra, desire. Matzah is bland. Matzah does not rise, it's flat. And what is chametz? Something which ferments, it's tasty, and it rises. Taste represents desire, tastier, and when it rises, that represents arrogance. That's gaiva. That's the Yetzer Hara. That's the evil inclination. For 7 days, the Torah says you have to remove yourself from that involvement. Desire, you must withhold desire in the staple, and also it's flat, which represents humility. And if you engage in that for a week, you don't even have chametz in your possession, it gives you enough reinvigoration that you're able to maintain the balance throughout the year. You can contend with the Yetzer Hara, with evil inclination. That's what it is. The meal offering that you bring on Pesach, the Omer offering, or any other meal offering, it's matzah. It's not chometz. If it's chometz, it's what? It's not valid. Not only the kemitza, the chometz, the palmful that you put on his back can be chometz. Even the remainder, which is eaten by the kohanim, even that cannot be chometz. Has to be totally removed from chametz, the meal offering. But yet the shtei alechem, which are bread, which are wheat, which represents our reclassification of Adam, that we reach the pinnacle of our spirituality, the shtei alechem are chametz. It has to be made of, it's leavened. It's not matzah. It seems to be contradictory. When you're at the animal level, it cannot be chametz, or any other mitzvah cannot be chametz. But when you reach the pinnacle of the spirituality, it has to be chametz. The question is why? You'd think definitely at this time. Now that you have to have control, definitely it should not be chametz. The shtei alechem. So you could say simply to answer that what is life? As Adam, what is life? Life is challenges. An animal has no challenges. Its behavior is purely instinctive. Instinctive, it behaves way. A human being, everything we do is based on our ability to make choices. If we fail, we chose to fail. If we succeed, we chose to overcome the challenge and deal with the issue. So because the Adam, the human being, represents challenge, therefore specifically that's the reason why it has to be chametz. Now we have the Yetzer Hara, as we said. We have the inclination. But as Adam, we have the ability to contend with him. And because we have the ability, therefore, when we do deal with him correctly, therefore, we're worthy of reward. Because if it's beyond our ability, it's not a challenge. So only then, when we reach Adam, do we have the capacity to be able to what? To take control of ourselves. That's why there it's what? It's specifically chametz. Before, it's nothing to talk about. You don't have the capacity. Now you have the capacity, therefore now it's chametz. Okay? But what we said in the past, we said something, not what I'm saying right now. What we said in the past was that people, we find that Hashem does not associate his name, even with the Avos HaKadoshim, until they passed away. Why? Because a person, until the last moment of his life, God forbid, could go south, could choose to do, he could be a tzaddik all his life, and the last moment, he chooses to what? To check out, to reject everything that he believed in until that moment. What the Torah is telling us with the chometz, now that you've achieved Adam and you're at your pinnacle of spirituality, so you think that what? You don't have to contend with issues that you have to contend in the past because you have such a level of clarity. The answer is, until the person dies, you're never free of the influence of the evil inclination. Chometz is always embedded in us. The evil inclination always it shackles us until the moment we leave this world. So that's what the Torah is telling us, that even though you're Adam, it's wheat, which is the ultimate, you're still subject to the influence of the Yetzer Hara at some level. Therefore, that's why that korban, the Shtei Alechem, is specifically chometz and not matzah for that reason. That's what we said in the past. But what I'm saying today, I think, is even another level, that we're only because we're Adam, that's where we have the ability to meet the challenges. So the chometz is the challenge. Being Adam, we have the ability. And therefore, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, if a person fails, he's culpable for that failing. And if he succeeds, he's worthy of the reward because it's only due to his own choice that he succeeded, to take control of that situation. I want you to ask the question again, and then we'll respond. Go ahead.
We went to Egypt because of Avram Avinu's inappropriate question. It was supposed to be there 400 years, but we only stayed there 210. It was supposed to cure the glitch in the Avram Avinu's foundation of spiritual DNA. And 40 days after we received the Torah at Sinai, we create the golden calf. It seems as if the 210 years in Egypt were an unsuccessful curing of that glitch.
Okay, let me respond. We'd ask the question that the Torah says explicitly that a child is not culpable for the sins of the father. But yet, we spent 210 years in Egypt because Avram failed. It says, Lo yumsa avos albonim, ubonim lo yumsa avosam. A father doesn't die for the sins of the child, and the child is not culpable for the sins of the father. So why did we have to spend 210 years in Egypt to pay for the failing of Avram Avinu? So we've explained in the past that Avram Avinu is the foundation of the Jewish people. And if there's a defect in the foundation, the whole structure is what ultimately is not going to be able to last eternally. So to correct that defect, that was the 210 years. The suffering, it's called the Kura Barzel. It's called the smelter. We put through the smelter. That suffering brought about, corrected the foundation. Were we still subject to the evil inclination? We were subject to the evil inclination. But why were we subject to the evil inclination? We nearly were totally expunged of it during this 49-day ascent, leaving, till we arrived at Sinai. But because we had to leave before the time, because we wouldn't have survived, as it says, we fell to the 49th level of impurity. If we would have stayed a moment longer, we would have gone to the oblivion. As a result of that, even after the ascent, there was still a trace of this impurity. And because of that, we were vulnerable to the machinations of the rabble who went out with us. As it says explicitly, the Jews themselves did not initiate the golden calf. It was the rabble who initiated it, but that we were vulnerable to their suggestion was only because there was a trace of that impurity which remained with us from Egypt. There's two separate things. The suffering was corrected, the defect. But factually, we had a lot of baggage. We were relieved of all that impurity, which was due to this period of time, through the 49-day ascent. However, there was a trace of it, and that trace allowed us to be vulnerable to the entrapment or the machinations, the influence of the rabble. That's the understanding. Total offering is 40 loaves of bread you bring, 30 a matzah. It's a meal offering. 30 a matzah, 10 a chametz. When you bring a thanks offering, you bring an animal, which is this equivalent of shlomim, a peace offering, and it's accompanied with 40 loaves, 30 a matzah, 10 a chametz. The question is, why chametz? I mean, every meal offering is not chametz. Why? For some reason, the total offering, 10 has to be chametz. The majority are not chametz. Why? So the Sefarno explains something interesting. Why do you bring a thanks offering? You're thanking God that you're alive. Person recovers from a serious illness. Person traverses the desert, travels the high seas. Person's released from prison. You thank God that you're alive. That's the thank you offering. Now, if a person is sin-free, there's no reason why your life should be compromised. The only reason why your life is compromised is because your record is not perfect. And based on that imperfect record, being in a state of danger, your life should have been compromised. So why wasn't it compromised? Because Hashem chose to keep you alive despite your compromised record. So the reason why you bring a total offering is only because of sin. Because if you're sin-free, you don't have to say thank you because there's no reason the person should even be considered culpable that he should die. That's the Sefarno. That's why 10 of the 40 loaves of chametz to indicate that despite your level of impurity, despite that Hashem allowed you to live. So that's why we give thank you. That's the Sefarno. What I said was, most people, let's say today, you travel the high seas, you take a ocean voyage. If we would have a base of Midrash, you'd have to bring a total offering. We bench gomel, we say a gomel. Person recovers from a serious illness, he sends gomel. All these situations. But most people recover. Most people don't die when they take a sea voyage. So why say thank you? Why say thank you? Now there's a question. Whenever we speak about a statistic, does the statistic say that it's a confirmation, it's not danger? As long as you take all the precautions, that the ship is seaworthy, and we travel through the desert, you travel in a way that you're protected, so you're not in the state of danger? Well, no. Being in the ocean is worthy as that ship is seaworthy, or being in the desert, whatever precautions you take, it's a location of danger, and the only reason why you're alive is because Hashem wanted you to be alive. Even though you may have 98% of people who travel where the ship is seaworthy, and you have all whatever's needed to go through the desert. Despite that, you're in a state of danger. So why did you survive? Because Hashem wanted every one of those 98% of people to be alive. That's what the Torah is telling us. So therefore, as a result of that, now it says, there's a question, why is it so difficult to say thank you? Right? When do you say thank you? If you recognize you're a beneficiary of someone, you say thank you. But if you're not a beneficiary, you don't say thank you. What does thank you mean? Thank you means you're a debtor. I'm indebted to you. Who wants to be indebted? It's not simple. I prefer to somehow put another spin on it. And therefore, rather than being indebted, because I don't want to be a debtor, to say, It's for some other reason why you did it, but it wasn't for me. If you recognize that you're a beneficiary of Hashem's kindness, otherwise you wouldn't be alive. That means you're indebted. If you're indebted, as God created a person, you have responsibility to pay. There's a payment of debt. You have to toe the line. So a person has a challenge now. How do you see when you travel in a ship that's seaworthy? Why are you alive? Are you alive because the ship was seaworthy? Or despite as seaworthy as it was, Hashem chose that you survived because he wanted you to live. So that's not so simple. That's a challenge. To see that he wanted me to live, that means I'm a debtor. To say it's a statistic, if the ship is seaworthy, you live, I'm not a debtor. That's the chometz. When you bring a total offering, that means you met the challenge. Despite the reason to see it wrongly, you saw it correctly, and that's why you're saying thank you. That's how we explained it. Not like the Sefarno. Because the person only says thank you because there's a reason why you shouldn't have lived. No, it's because it's a challenge. To recognize it, that it's Hashem, and despite the fact is that you're indebted, you see it that way rather than processing and saying, I'm part of a statistic. And boom. We learned in Bayom that there's a famous argument between Rebbe Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. How do you celebrate Yom Tov? Is it Kul Lachem Kul Hashem? It's based on two psukim. That you invest, if you want to celebrate it, just feasting, you can. You don't have to set aside time for learning. Well, no, you have to divide the day. 50% of the day is in the base Medrash, 50% of the day is celebration. That's not Rebbe Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you have no choice, you have to divide the day. Rabbi Lezer says the Torah gives us an option. Whatever you want, fully be invested in Torah without physical celebration is fine. Or no, if you want to fully invest in rejoicing physically, you can. However, the Gemara says, although there's a machlokas between the two of them regarding Yom Tov, but the Amoraim say the three exceptions to the rule, where even Rebbe Lezer, who says one can fully invest in spirituality, you must invest in physical celebration. What is that? Shabbos, Bina Nami Lochem, you have to celebrate in a way where you're celebrating eating wise. Shavuos, Yom Shenit Torah Yisrael, because as the day Torah was given to Klal Yisrael, you have to celebrate in the physical sense. And Purim, which we were saved, because it says you may mishta v'simcha, mishta means feasting. Therefore, even Rebbe Lezer agrees that you have to feast. You can't invest the whole day in learning, in spirituality. These are the three exceptions. Okay? So Purim is very easy to understand as the Maral explains, and the Chofetz Chaim cites it. Chanukah, there's no mitzvah there's no mitzvah of Suda. Purim, there's a mitzvah of Suda. Why? Because the miracle of Purim and miracle of Chanukah were two different types of miracles. Why did the Greeks want to destroy us? What was the basis for the battle? Because we weren't willing to accept idolatry. And we're willing to die for Torah. So it was what? It was a spiritual issue. The miracle was that we defeated them and we had the upper spiritually, we were able to reestablish ourselves. We were not Hellenized. Therefore, since the miracle was a spiritual miracle, we don't feast. But in Purim, where the decree was to annihilate every man, woman, and child, regardless, it had nothing to do with your beliefs. You could have been a pagan. But if you're a Jew, Haman wanted to annihilate you. So there, what was the miracle? It had to do with our physicality. It was had to do with our physicality. Therefore, there's a mitzvah we have to feast to indicate that point that has to do with our physicality. So Purim's easy. But Shavuos, you'd say just to the contrary. Because it's the Yom Shenit Torah Yisrael, because it's the day Torah was given to Klal Yisrael. That's the reason why I have to feast. Right? You would say just the opposite. Here we became greater than Malachim. Atem Kurim Odom. So why is the mitzvah to feast? Because it's Yom Shini the Torah Yisro. It's the day the Torah was given to Klal Yisrael. Therefore, that's the day Bina Nami Lochem. That's the reason. So some say, the Gemara tells us in Shabbos that the Malachim, when Hashem wanted to give the Torah to Klal Yisrael, the Malachim came with a claim: you should leave your splendor in heaven. Man is so fickle, he's not worthy to receive the Torah. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was in Shemayim, Moshe Anei Lechem, respond. So he said to them, it says in the Sefiras HaOmer, Hashem Elokecha Shotzisichem Eretz Mitzrayim, were you ever in Egypt? You were never in Egypt. It says, Kabed Yisavich Vesimecha, honor your father and mother. Do you have a father and mother? So it's only because of our physicality, that's how Moshe Rabbeinu was actually victorious over the angels, because that was the response. So it's only because of our physicality, therefore, to indicate that was the basis why we were able to surpass the angels. That's the reason why being an Amalekhem. That's what some answer based on that. And what about Shabbos? And the Gemara quotes a pasuk. Pasuk in Navi says, "Ukarosu Shabbos oneg." You must declare Shabbos as oneg. That's what Shabbos is. You have to have therefore you have physically, you have to celebrate. Be involved physically, have joy from eating. So, but is there something, a common denominator, which runs through every one of these days? Shabbos, Kabbalah Torah, and what? And Purim. So we once said, the way I explained it in the past, what is the ultimate objective in terms of accomplishment in life? To reach milestones. I always give an example. You have to build a 100-story building, and you build up you put the 99th story, and you don't put on the extra story. The building's not complete. But if you have a 50-story building, and you build the 50-story building as it's supposed to be built, that's a complete building. It's completed. It's called Chanukas Habayis. What is Shabbos? Chanukas Habayis. You complete a house, you build it, you celebrate, because the house is complete. It's ready to move in. When was the world ready for real time? Shabbos was what? Was Chanukas Habriya. That was the celebration, the completion of creation. Therefore, Hashem says, the Koros of Shabbos Oneg. When you reach the milestone of achievement, of shleimus, of completion, you reach a milestone, you celebrate. That's the ultimate basis for celebration. Okay? We find in time of creation says, Vayer Vayvoka Yom Hashishi. Even though it reached a level of completion, but it was contingent. At Sinai, if the Jews don't accept the Torah, everything goes back to zero, goes back to pre-existence. So, and the Gemara quotes a posuk that the world was tottering until the Jews said, Nasa b'nishmat Sinai. So when did the world take on a level of permanence? Yom Shini Torah Yisrael. The day that Torah was given to us, it took on a level of permanence. So it was an upgrade of shleimus. Until then, it was completed, but it wasn't so, the permanence was lacking. When did it take a level of permanence? That's what happened at Sinai. But what was Sinai? It was under duress. So qualitatively speaking, it was what? It was considered inferior type of acceptance. When did we have a reaffirmation and it was done out of love? That was Purim. Kimu v'kibru. So because it was an upgrade of that shleimus, therefore when shleimus is the ultimate level of what? Of celebration, therefore at every juncture of shleimus, whether it was initially, although it was contingent, or it was Sinai, which was what? Which was deficient, but it was shleimus, because it was under duress. And the ultimate is what is Purim, because that's Kimu v'kiblu, it was Kabbalah mi'avo, we reaffirmed it out of love. That's reason, since each one was a juncture of shleimus, therefore that's the ultimate moment that you celebrate. Okay, that's the concept. You can apply it to many things. A bris, what do you celebrate a bris? A child is considered not perfect till you remove that foreskin. Therefore you make that the shleimus. He's a sholim. It says Avram Avinu, it's called Avram when he had the circumcision. Abraham is Ramach. He's considered a complete person. The child, the Gemara says in Shabbos, that until Mila b'Shabbos, it's considered Makah b'Patish. You're not considered perfect until you remove that foreskin. It's like you bring the person to a level of perfection. It's not Makalkim. It's Masakim. That's what it is. So many things you could apply to this. But that's applied to marriage, to many things. We'll stop over.
So